I talked more about robotics and art, but I do a lot of things. So however you see me, I'd like your honest interpretation of what I'm going to.
Nice to meet you. Are you presenting? Okay, cool. I'm not. I am very excited. Are you presenting or surprised? That part is too easy. Sounds promising. You work with fiber art? Not, okay.
All right, everybody. We're ready to start. Thank you, everybody who came here. I really, really appreciate it. I know traffic is horrible. Thursdays are Fridays now. And in LA, it's all about the traffic. And all of you watching, streaming, hi, now and in the future as well. Just a brief introduction. Laser is not a laser show. It's Leonardo Art Science Evening Rendezvous. It started about 12 years ago. And from 3-4 places, now there's about 30 places around the world, gatherings like this that can be very small or large or formal or informal. We like to have them informal, and our talks are very short, so we leave more time for chattering, socializing, just getting to know each other, and also promoting kind of collaborations, which happens a lot. We've seen a lot of amazing collaborations happen. So with that, I'll introduce our first speaker, Andrew McGregor. And I'll give you a little idea about his eclectic background. He has done so many different things that to call him Renaissance would be easy. Let's just say some. Filmmaker, inventor, writer, chess box champion, entrepreneur, frequent TEDx speaker, mentor, Highlands Games athlete, photojournalist, bagpiper magician, and he curates Mindshare LA that soon or now is starting to actually work with UCLA, and was nominated for a Grammy for his bagpipe playing. How amazing is that? Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for hosting these and keeping this community. And hello, everyone. How are you? It's such a privilege. I came to these several years ago, so it's kind of a deep honor for me to be able to stand on this podium and offer something of value to the community. So thank you, and hello, World Wide Webs. Cool. Right. So yes, that's me. My name is Andrew McGregor. And yeah, I wanted to start out with this image. This is a classic optical illusion. You know, it's either two men staring at each other or it's a vase. And for me, this is like a good metaphor for this somewhat false dichotomy of art and science. Like, is it art or is it science? And so you can think of what, the two faces are the art or the vase is science, da-da-da. But for me, and I'm going to go through a few projects I've done, it's really all the same. And the optical illusion is when we focus on one or the other. But if we kind of just have this notion of this metaphor in the back of our minds, we don't get stuck in these silos or these boxes. And so yeah, thank you for the introduction. A little bit more about me and kind of what brought me into this kind of different way of thinking that I hope can be of service in your own projects is, this is me about a decade ago in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I had started an NGO that in the region, we started in Rwanda and worked throughout Central and East Africa, but we were teaching journalism to people in conflict zones and refugee camps and very difficult situations. And the methodology there was to bring in kind of the high-tech new media journalism and teach people in those situations how to do their own storytelling. And then they were able to kind of report to CNN and Reuters when violence was occurring and things like that. But it was also a great way to help people get out of poverty who don't have like a normal or kind of a Western infrastructure, right? Because you can get freelance jobs with money and things like that. So this is when like all hell was really breaking loose, and that's a UN helicopter I couldn't get on, is like the mortars were being dropped in this town, and like there was this Kafkaesque thing of I couldn't get on the list. But this really changed my life. And so I was in Central Africa doing this NGO work and teaching kind of new technologies in places that didn't have them at that time. And then, so that was traumatic, but then I got back and I was a little shell-shocked from the journalism work, and I started the first chess boxing club in North America. That's me and actually the first chess boxing bout in this country, punching a German guy in the face. And I won that. And so, yeah, most people would see like a conflict of chess and boxing. Obviously, concussions aren't good for the chess, but kind of as I've gone through my life, I definitely see them as a good marriage, so to speak. And then this is me lifting a large stone. There's this thing called historic stones or manhood stones in Scotland and Norway, where there are these rocks that have been around for centuries. And then the ancient days, like several centuries ago, if you would lift it, you're considered a mature member of the clan. So I do things like that. And then, yeah, here I am with Mindshare LA, and that's, again, another kind of art-science fusion thing. So I just want to kind of give this as a background milieu for kind of my life. And I'm going to talk about my robotics work and then my humanitarian technology work. So after I got out of DR Congo, I was deeply affected by war and atrocities, and particularly what war does to children. And so one of the horrible things about conflict is landmines. And so if you're not familiar with them, they're these small explosive devices, and they're particularly prominent in Southeast Asia, former Yugoslavia, parts of West and East Central Africa, and then obviously Syria now. But I was a filmmaker. I didn't have an engineering background, right? I was documentary journalism media guy. So I wanted to use science fiction to inspire real world solutions, or like to help the Star Trek nerds work on their technology. And so I wrote a screenplay that's a love story between a rat and a robot who guide humans out of a landmine field. And the reason it's a rat and a robot is there's a real NGO that trains rats to find landmines called a Popo. And so I had heard about them during my conflict photography stuff. And then I thought, wouldn't it be really cool if like the rat and the robot could collaborate? And so this is an early sketch. But then I ultimately would make my movie. And so it's a part live action, part animation. It's called Where the Robot Things Are. If you want to see it, it's doing the festival circuit now. And then when I got the movie made, I got really into the idea of making my robot a reality. I had this metaphor that robots can be like enchanted puppets, right? Or like puppets with microcontrollers, that kind of idea. It's not wholly accurate, but it was definitely useful to get me into the robotics world. So I became what's called a maker. You're probably all familiar with this stuff, but I kind of blew up with it. So that's the initial robot for my movie that I was making in reality. And I got kind of featured on Intel's series about like great makers and things like that. So I was able to generate publicity to the cause of landmines, and also to connect more Western audiences with landmines, because often it's considered like a malaria problem. It just doesn't affect this part of the world. But by using technology, and particularly the maker movement, I was able to kind of teach kids about a humanitarian crisis, and also robotics, and also storytelling, right? Because the storytelling led to my robotics work. So this was kind of the pinnacle of the robotics work, is we were starting to test real rats with the real robot. And so in my filmmaker imagination, like, they would all get along and be friends. And this was like a very polite, well-trained rat. And it would like eat food from your hand and like, oh, it's all cute. However, so this is a bit of food in a kind of modified fish food dispenser. But when we actually had the robot and the rat together, the rat just attacked the robot. It was like, it had viciousness in it. It wasn't even like, oh, I'm gonna subtly dig for food. The rat just tore into the robot and ripped out the food. And so there was that problem, right? And then like I didn't quite realize how horribly difficult a challenge I had given. Like it gets into like consciousness and theory of mind and like all these impossible to solve robotics problems when I was just trying to get a rat and a robot to work together, right? As a little buddy team. So it's like, oh, is it done? And then so I was about to move on from the project when I saw a lecture by a roboticist named Ian Ingram, who makes robots that communicate with animals in nature. And then I kind of went up to him kung fu style and became his like apprentice for a summer. And so he got me onto this guy named Jakob von Uxkolm, who has this idea of kind of like semiotics of mutual comprehension. So for example, if you think of a meadow, there are bees in the meadow, right? But the bees are only interested in flowers. They're not really interested in you. And so they have a sensory perception locked in with the flower, where they can see certain wavelengths that even we can't perceive on that flower. Similarly, deer and humans have a predator-prey-ish relationship, right? So we can see each other. So if you think of like a meadow as like these bubbles of perception, you can kind of get an idea of how we can connect different organisms together using sensors that are commonly available. So for example, a hawk has a telescopic lens for eyes, right? Like hawks can like track voles at 300 yards and then go whoosh, and grab them. This is a pit viper. It kind of sees heat signatures, so it's able to hunt nocturnally. And so that's kinds of it's sensory perception, right? Is the mammal has a certain body temperature that the viper can perceive. And then obviously the famous echolocation with bats. You can imitate that with a very affordable sensor. So with this kind of thinking of animal communication via mutual perception, my mentor Ian Ingram and I kind of had this idea. He had the idea to use the body motion of the rat to let the rat communicate when it detects a landmine. And so basically when the rat finds a landmine, it scratches on it, and the human is watching this, but we augmented it with a little technology of an accelerometer. I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but accelerometers are in all your cell phones. It lets you kind of play video games like this, and that determines changes in motion. But we're able to interpret the rat's body motion on an XYZ coordinate basis and then send that off to a cell phone, and that gets interpreted in real time. And this is kind of the results of war photography, movies, So that's the backpack. That's my mentor. And yeah, that's us in Tanzania. Tanzania doesn't have a landmine problem, but that's where they train the rats. And so that's one of my kind of robotics projects. And that's not like blown up or anything. They're actually that big. And they're awesome. They're like friendly, but they're tough, which is very admirable, right? Because normally tough things are like cruel, and you're like, it had a bad rat background, so I get it. Streets of New York rat. But no, they're like really friendly, but they're very tough creatures. So that's one robotics project. So once I had kind of done this, other opportunities in this way of thinking emerged. So this is another project I've done. This is more just the pure art space, but it has a similar kind of idea. After I had learned to facilitate rat-to-human communication, I started to kind of work with an artist named Kwon Wu, and we made this big plant. So this is a moss atop of kind of like a whoopee cushion, and it breathes. And then when a person touches it, it responds to you. It's called Teenage Meadow because it gets kind of cranky and it deflates. So it's like a fascinating kind of interactive sculpture, but there were some things within this that, like, the context in which we put this deeply affects how humans will connect with it. So for example, if it's in an art gallery, it's considered precious and like no one will touch it, but we want you to touch it. That's the whole experience. But because of like the white walls and it's almost like that solemn church-like thing of like, I don't want to damage it, and the art gods will sue me. But when we take it to kind of like a festival event, people actually were pulling up chairs and treating it like a campfire and like really like pushing into it, and like children will like jump on it. And so that changed the whole context. And then also like the distance of chairs to it will deeply affect how people do it. So I bring this up that like it's another kind of relationship facilitated by technology, but the context of where your plant robot is will kind of affect how people communicate with it. So there's just all these fascinating worlds and things you can do with very basic household items like plants and robotics. And then, so this is another robot thing I'm doing that deals with kind of inner machine-human communication, all that. It's a robot comedy jam. So we're working with a robotic chair, and it's a competition show with like stand-up comedians, clowns, and there's a school in LA called the Idiot School, which is this like absurdist theater. And so they work with this robot that's a chair that it has touch sensors and it responds to the human, but they try to get the most laughs this way. And so the chair becomes like a Charlie Chaplin kind of straight guy, and like the human are these like goofy, absurd things. But like through this peculiar interaction, there's like pure joy of comedy that you can get. So this is kind of another thing where it's like, is it art, is it science? But like in that moment of the performance, it's both, and it's no longer a paradox. It's just this kind of joyous thing of like performance art facilitated and in partnership with a robot and a robotic chair at that. So yeah, that's another thing I want to touch on. And then, this is another thing. So I do a practice called typewriter busking, and I learned this in Scotland last summer. And typewriter busking is where you sit out with a typewriter and you have a sign, and then people will come up and I'll write them stories or songs on the spot. And so I was doing this practice in Scotland, and I met a guy who had worked with a typewriter like this to make it just type out tweets. And I was like, wouldn't that be interesting if you could have AI in that typewriter? And so that's what I've developed. So if you want to tweet, I'm training on love poems, and I want people to help me. So if you tweet to @AI_poems, tweet it some kind of love poem, and we're training this typewriter to create love poems. And long term, I want it to work with an individual person to let them complete the love poem and then mail it off to the intended recipient. So that kind of virtual into the physical thing I find fascinating. But yeah, also to create an enchanted typewriter is really neat, but it's using really hardcore machine learning stuff to this cute end. So that's another kind of project that deals with relationships and things like that, and art and science ultimately being a singular entity, at least in my practice. And then so to kind of wrap it all up and with another community endeavor, I curate a robot-themed art show once a year at a great gallery in downtown Los Angeles called The Hive. And so this Saturday, we have our opening. The theme is Robot Dream. So we have roboticists who make robots that, in the gallery context, right, they become works of art, and then kind of fine art, sculptor, painters, and imagine what robots can be with this idea of robot dreams. And we've gotten some really cool stuff. Just on a personal note, a lot of the fine art painters have created things that would be considered AI-generated art. But it's with brushstrokes and stuff. So just kind of naturally, there's been this is a cultural zeitgeist thing, confluence of aesthetic, sentiments of what AI is doing that people are training it to make art with, and what actual artists think AI would dream about. And they're kind of meeting in the middle. You can see all this at the show. It's beautiful. I was there setting up all day. So yeah, please come out. And then my website is mightykingdrew.com should you wish to be in contact, and thank you for your time. And all these ideas are open source and fun, so if you want to take an AI typewriter, I'm here to help you achieve that dream. And thank you for your time, and best wishes on everything you do. Thank you.
What a way to start. Amazing. Thank you. So our next person is Emma, who is an artist. She does mixed media artworks, and actually was introduced to us by Maru Garcia, who's in the ArtSci collective. And she works on the troubled relationship between human and environmental byproducts, in particular with industrial waste and processes. She works with diverse community groups, from botanists of the Chumash Nation and Hualapai Indian tribe, and her sculptures show this symbiotic relationship. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here tonight. It was only a year ago, actually, that I saw Maru Garcia giving her laser talk, and I continued and followed to do the laser talks and listen to them, and they're quite inspiring. So thank you so much. Is the volume okay? Is it good? Yeah? Okay. So my name is Emma Ekmekshon. I graduated from California State University, Channel Islands, with my Bachelor of Arts in 2018. And contrary to what everyone believes, we do not take boats to get to the university. The university is based in Camarillo, right above Los Angeles and close to Ventura. But a disclaimer to that is that the university does have a research station out on Santa Rosa Island. So any opportunity I had, I would take to go out there and assist researchers and environmental scientists. And this started a lifelong, what I consider a lifelong passion for the Channel Islands and for the history of the islands, being that for thousands of years they had Chumash Native Americans living there. And then they created these beautiful basket pieces. And so in summer 2018, after I graduated, I started assisting my friend, Michaela Miller, who's been doing marine debris research on the islands. And so what this looked like was not your typical beach cleanup, because the island is rugged, extreme weathers, and it's uninhabited. So even though it had Chumash people on it for thousands of years, and then had rancheros, and then it was taken over by the national park in the 1980s. And so now it's left as a place for research. And backpacking up and down the beaches with several pounds of trash on your back is unlike any other beach cleanup I've ever done before. So it's a unique place. And also considering that these beaches have only seen maybe a handful of 5 people all year long. So these are beaches that you know are desolate, you know that people aren't treading on, and they've returned to their natural coastline state. Yet you see this abundance of trash wash up on the shores every single season. And then we go and collect it, and then more comes up, and then more comes up. And so the story goes on, and our impact is definitely felt even in the most desolate places on Earth. So while I was picking up trash, at first I was kind of interested in the materials, and I started to explore these different pieces of trash and what I could do with it with my art. But one of the things that really drew me in was this white, crispy, crunchy piece of seeming trash, and I picked it up, and it was actually a piece of seaweed underneath this crusty film. And I realized after the fact, I had taken it home with me, and I realized, oh, that's a lace-encrusting bryozoan. It has a colony that had created on top of this seaweed, and it was so dense that you couldn't see the seaweed behind it. So in this picture here, you can see it a little bit, but it's mostly completely covered, and it seems to follow the growth of the seaweed, so they're living symbiotically with it. And this was really interesting to me because looking closely at this, I started to see these beautiful woven patterns in nature, and this inspired me to weave my first piece. So this is my first piece, Colony, that I wove, and I picked up little pieces of seaweed along the beach in the kelp rack, and I started to do these impressions on tiles. So I was inspired by the bryozoan and the way they formed their colonies, and I was also inspired by Michaela's work, picking up trash on the islands. And one of the most abundant pieces of trash that you'll find on the island is fishing net and fishing rope, specifically lobster trap rope, which is very abundant because that's one of the biggest commercial fishing industries in Southern California. And so this is all lobster trap rope as a tapestry, and then the plates laid on top of it that were inspired by the colonies of the bryozoan. After this, I became really obsessed, you can say, with seaweeds. And I reached out to a researcher who's doing work on the Channel Islands. He's been studying the kelp forests for the past 30 years. And he's been diving underwater to do this research, collecting all types of measurements. And what he had found was that in the non-marine protected areas, you had these desert sea urchin barrens that have just been completely decimated by the commercial fishing industry and by this rise in sea urchins that in part is because the keynote species like lobster and otters have been they've decimated completely, and now there's nothing left. And so this is an ecosystem that I think of, and I think of it as something that's out of sight and out of mind for many people, but it plays such an important role in our economy and in our well-being as a huge food source for the entire world. So most of the stuff that's fished on the Channel Islands ends up in China and in other parts of the world where it's being processed and then shipped globally. And so this was my piece that was reflecting on the disappearance of the lobster trap, the spiny California lobster, and also using the materials that Michaela and I found on these trips. And then I moved to Arizona for a short period to do a residency. And while I was there, I was very sad for a while because I was really far away from the water. And I really enjoy the water, and that's where my source of inspiration was. But I knew I wanted to keep going with this kelp forest and continue talking to this marine scientist, David Kushner, and I wanted to create this large installation. And so I reached out to a different type of person. I reached out to a Wallapai botanist, and I went on hikes with her. And instead of searching so much for water in the desert, I started to look at the roots and other types of plants like the cholla and the yucca being a plant that the Wallapai would use to weave with. And so this continued my fascination in weaving and indigenous traditions. And then I moved again. I had a really busy year this year, so I went to Venice, Italy for 3 months, and I was doing an internship at the Guggenheim. And now I was completely surrounded by water, so I was very happy. But there was something that was missing. I wanted to go someplace a little bit more natural. So Venice is built on 10 million pier pilings. And as many of you know, Venice is feeling the heat of climate change and has a lot of issues. So I started talking to a few scientists out there, one in Ca' Foscari who's been doing bioremediation, planting lots of seagrass to bring more oxygen into the lagoon. And then I also spoke to a researcher who's been recycling fishing nets and creating imaginary projects with them. And so I knew exactly what I wanted. I wanted a really big fishing net, and I wanted to do a project with my peers involving a giant fishing net. And I didn't know where to get it, so I was frantically reaching out to people. And then I decided to take a boat, to take a bus, to take a ferry, and to take another bus to this little islet called Santa Maria del Mare, which is right past Lido. And that's where I found this beauty. And so when I first found it, I was like, there's no way I can carry this home on my own. It's probably 50 pounds and almost the size, bundled up, the size of me. And so I brought my friend Lisa with me, and I've known her since a very young age, and we started to play like we were kids again. And what I noticed is that crawling into the net felt like being in a really comfortable space, like you were in a womb almost. And she completely agreed. And so I took that as the starting point for a project called Retracing Roots. So what we did is I got together a group of peers from the museum that came from all over the world. I think there was a total of 12 nationalities working on this project. And we decided to trace a route with the fishing net over our heads from Piazza San Marco all the way down to St. Elena. And St. Elena is the last stop with the Vaporetto before you take the boat all the way to the sand spit of Lido, which is a more natural destination, and it connects these different islets of the lagoon. And so in the project, I have a short clip here of what this project looked like. So we all carried it together, and even all together, it was still very heavy. We dressed in these outfits that we had individually created with the trash that was collected on Lido. And then at the very end of the project, when we reached St. Elena in the park, here we're moving a little quicker than in real life. This took at least a few hours, and afterwards their arms were sore for the whole week. They said it was more like a workout than an art project. But so we each crawled into the net, and we shed our outfits into this net. And so the net was a symbol for the womb, and so it was showing this cycle of bioaccumulation of plastics that was happening. And it was also reminiscent of the carnival tradition in Venice. And there was a show in Venice, actually, that I found very fascinating. It was Barbados and Antigua that put it on. And carnival is actually a tradition that they believe began in the Caribbean as environmental protests. So I thought this was a really interesting overlap. Oh, whoops. Okay, then I came home back to California, and I've been home for a while now, so that's been relieving. And I started to stop looking so much at the synthetic, and I wanted to reconnect with natural materials. And so I started looking at this Turkish towel, a type of rhodophyta seaweed, and I started preserving it to keep this kind of almost gelatinous texture. And I started experimenting with this in my art. And then over the summer, I read an article that the Sonoma West had published talking about the crash of the kelp forest. And at the very front of the article was this very iconic photo of a Nereocystis bull kelp, which is here. And I absolutely adore this species of seaweed, and it was very sad to read that they had just published a 100-page manual to try to save this ecosystem that is nearly gone on their shores. And they likened it to if the sequoias all of a sudden were torn down. And so that's basically what I kind of see these sea urchins as munching up the whole kelp forest and other problems with not having the biodiversity that we need in the kelp forests. And so I took this as reference for a next art piece that I would create for the kelp forest, which would be a Nereocystis bull kelp. And I went back to Michaela and I collected the data sets that she had taken over the past 4 years. And I created proportions and colors and wove patterns that reflected the quantity and dispersal of the different types of trash that you would find on Santa Rosa, Santa Cruz Island, and also the mainland. And most of the trash, again, is fishing gear, and so I continued this as my medium. And then at the so the really beautiful thing about the Nereocystis bull kelp, unlike other seaweeds, is that it has one singular holdfast, or the roots, and then it has a really long stipe that can be anywhere from 10 to 100 meters long, and just one singular float made with, it has gases in it like methane. And so what I did for the very end is that I did a concrete cast of different scientists who work on the Channel Islands, and I mixed in a lot of the microplastics that were collected, or smaller plastics, smaller than 5 millimeters, that were collected on the islands. Sorry for this next photo. I was supposed to give you a warning, but I didn't. So on this last trip that I went out to the island, I was walking along the shore, and I didn't see this, and then I turned around and I walked back, and all of a sudden this sea lion appeared out of nowhere. It had just gotten washed in with a giant wave, and I thought there was something really beautiful about it, and I started to think about creating another Nereocystis bull kelp inspired by the colors of decay that I was seeing on the island. And this was also inspired by David Kushner, who urged me to create contrasts between these non-marine protected and protected areas. And then also on the beach, I found this beautiful little Nereocystis. So this is actually the piece of seaweed that I had wove. This is what it would look like in real life, but this is decaying and withering away. And so then with those inspirations, I created this piece here, and this is another Nereocystis bull kelp, but very different from the first one I created that was very lively. This one's kind of sunken in and barely holding on, and reflective of the situation with the kelp forests right now. And the really interesting thing about this is that this is another buoy here. So these are the giant floats for boats. But the really interesting thing about this one is that it says Bakkesfabrikken and then made in Norway. And I looked up the company, and I think that they shut down a while ago and turned into Polyform, if I'm not mistaken. And so this was really interesting because it kind of puts things into context. Well, where are these pieces of trash coming from that are found on the islands? Are they from global currents that are bringing them in, or are they from nearby companies? So this was the installation I did with the piece. And the very last piece that I was working on was kind of this opposite way of thinking, where you're waiting for paints to dry. I was waiting for tar to melt over a buoy. So every day at noon for 2 weeks, I would film tar melting over this buoy, and I created a video of it melting. And this was reflective on the fact that the Chumash, they would create baskets, and then they would use natural resources like tar to line their baskets and heat water. So I found this very interesting, this way that we used to use natural resources in this transition. And then while I was filming, there was this really sweet little praying mantis that popped up over the lens and jumped onto the buoy. And so it was another interaction that I found fascinating to record, this interaction with nature and bringing into light things that people don't usually get the ability to see. You know, a lot of scuba divers get to see kelp forests, but not a lot of people, and they hold a really important weight in our economy and our food supply. So thank you so much.
So Carrie just walked in, and believe it or not, she drove from San Francisco. Your timing is pretty amazing. Thank you. Just a quick introduction of Carrie, who is actually the founder of Raw Science Television now, film festival, that I participated in last year, and it's pretty amazing, and I find her work to be quite inspiring because she's actually a bioengineer. She worked in medical communities and really started something from scratch, and it was very much this vision and persistence of vision that created this really important film festival as far as I'm concerned, because it truly brings art and science together, and it's putting it on the map in Hollywood. It's going to be in the Shrine in April. So I'm very excited for you being here and amazed that you made it from San Francisco. Thank you so much. Warm welcome.
Hello. Okay, hi. I have a presentation, and I think and I think my video is in there too. Let me just tab through real quick and make sure I got it. Yeah, sorry, I just did it so fast. I just want to make sure. Oh, okay. Is it connected to the internet by any chance? Okay, I'll be able. I can click in and get it. Okay, so I guess a little bit of background about myself. Can you hear me? Yeah. I used to be a ballet dancer professionally for several years before I went to college, and so I had a full life as an artist and as a performer, and really kind of grew up in the theater since I was a kid in Indiana, in a small town. And I graduated, and then I retired, and then I studied biomedical engineering, and I worked a pretty long career for about 15 years in biomedical engineering. But along that way, I still missed that other artistic life, and felt compelled to kind of combine them in ways that maybe are meaningful as well. And that's the maybe articulate way to try to describe it. But then really in reality, it's like I was in theaters, and now 20 years later, I realize I'm just taking engineers and scientists and putting them in a theater. So it's maybe less complex than that. But it was very apparent that about 6 years ago that science wasn't really staying at the forefront of pop culture. We didn't have fact-based experts leading the way. And if you look at young kids and what they care about and time and where they're spending their time and their energy, it's often on pop culture magazines or things. Not to criticize those activities, but science should be part of their lexicon, I guess. So I was lucky enough to win a pitch competition at Caltech to start an online science media company, and then started the festival. This will be our 6th year. So the big picture goal was kind of to break right into Hollywood with science. We already have sci-fi, and science fiction is definitely part of our culture for many years, but science itself, the subject of science, scientists, people that are making films and telling the best stories of science in the world isn't really in the Hollywood stage. So the film festival, the ultimate goal is to get approved as an Academy qualifying festival. And this year, I'll kind of quickly go through this presentation, but this year we're going to be 3 days in Los Angeles and 3 days in Costa Rica. And when we're in Los Angeles, we will be at the Shrine Auditorium, which is one of the largest theaters in the city. And it's also where the Oscars and the Grammys have been held. So we're literally storming the castle and bringing it right in. I should mention that the National Academy of Science and the Science and Entertainment Exchange first made this possible with an experimental grant back in 2014 was our first year. And the ultimate goal is really to be a world-class international film festival on par with Venice or Cannes, but for science media. And I'm really excited. Just 2 weeks ago, we won Best of Fest by Fest Forum, which is a group that has a board of the editor of Billboard, the co-founder of Woodstock, the president and founder of Sundance Productions, and the director of Glastonbury Festival, as well as the head of Live Nation. So that was super exciting, and to be celebrated there for this festival. The end. Let's see. I'll go straight into this. I'm going to tell a story about an example of something that I think we helped magnify, which is sort of the purpose of what we're doing, and it's also very touching. So 2 years ago, we had our event in Santa Barbara, and we brought the Afghan Girls Robot Team, sponsored them to come, and we're very honored for them to attend and to tell their story and talk about what it's like to transform their country with science, especially for girls and women. And so we that year happened to find a filmmaker who made a film called Salam, which is about the first Muslim person to win a Nobel Prize in physics. And he didn't have distribution on his film, so we invited him. It was actually 2 filmmakers, one from India and Pakistan, collaborated together and made this film. And so we invited him to submit. They won Best Documentary, and the film went on to win a few other awards, and they ended up getting us a Netflix deal out of it. And so now in Pakistan, there are many screenings occurring that are also spurring discussion about this physicist, but also science in Pakistan. So that was really cool. Our last event actually was at the UA Theater downtown in LA, and go more about that. So the other thing we're doing this year, new and different, is that in addition to the 3 days that we have in LA and the Shrine, we're going to then take the festival to Costa Rica, where the country is very focused on sustainability. They actually abolished the army 70 years ago in Costa Rica, so there's no army, they just have a few thousand police, and they're based geographically between Panama and Nicaragua. And the country really focuses a lot on healthcare, infrastructure, STEM education, sustainability, and other things. So it's kind of a wonderful place to have it. And we're creating a film market there that's like the film market you would see at Berlin or other festivals in Europe. But there is not one for Latin America. So we're creating one for Latin America. And then the event will migrate from LA. After the 3 days in LA, we'll migrate there and we'll focus on this marketplace as well as sustainability and areas of film that relate, even including production and on films. There are different organizations through the Producers Guild of America here in LA and several of the studios where they have real missions to make the actual film sets and the production of film very sustainable as well. That's the Shrine on the top. I can't announce the other venue under there, but we're going to do like exhibitions and screenings there as well. Oh, this is very exciting. So especially for people that are in art and science combination. Gensler, which is a leading architecture and design firm around the world, is actually designing the architecture of the festival. So we would like the red carpet experience to be something uniquely based on, uniquely recognizable as a science and tech festival. So the red carpet up to the Shrine will be designed by Gensler, and then we'll go into detail maybe later about the other portion that Victoria is actually collaborating with us on to make an art exhibit that's going on the entryway, so that any of the pop culture pictures or broadcasts that you would see, you would uniquely identify it as a science tech festival. And then they're also creating the architecture of the marketplace in Costa Rica as well. And we're getting 45 students from the LA area, Midwest, United States, as well as Latin America that are going to get internships and help create these things. So that's pretty exciting. Yeah. I'm going to try to click, if that's okay. Can I exit out and click? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I see. Yep. Sorry, this is kind of disrupting, but. I just want to show, we have a video of the, here we go. Raw Science Film Festival 2020. Yes, and we included a link here, I think, to the video. We have a trailer. Oh, yeah, okay. I'm like, I know it's on the internet. We have a trailer of just the early submissions for the festival this year, and it's really great because we haven't even started publicity. We've actually never done. I just want to share one more story before we play the video. One of the reasons we got Best of Fest in Santa Barbara was because 2 years ago there was a massive fire, as you know, in Santa Barbara, and it was the biggest fire in California history. And then right after, like literally a day after the fire, there was a mudslide. And our event happened to be literally the day between the fire and the mudslide in Santa Barbara. So it was a huge evacuation. And somehow, and it's a red carpet award ceremony, so people come, black tie, formal attire. And like somehow we still got 400 people to drive through the fire and go to the event to celebrate science in the middle of the fire. Yeah, it was pretty great. And a lot of them were from LA, but actually from around the world. And so they literally drove through fire to go there. So that was very special. And this now, okay, this is our, here we go. So we had some hardcore fans, and therefore all of this is very organic. We've never had publicists yet. We haven't had any marketing, anything like that. But we have a great, wonderful following of people that are across the science and art spectrum. And so we've got about 100 submissions already. The deadline is due March 1st for any film. But we have like a very broad interpretation also of what is a science film. Like it could be anything from a straight up, traditional science documentary to there was a film that came out a couple years ago called Kiss the Sky, and it was about Andy Irons, the famous surfer who died of an opioid overdose. It's an extraordinarily beautiful film about him. And then interspersed, it talked about his bipolar disorder and opioid addiction, which is what he died from, and a little bit about the neuroscience of the brain and how a lot of surfers surf because the ocean also in some ways balances how they're feeling. So we consider that a science film because it's an interpretation of neuroscience in the brain. So this is a very short compilation of films this year, and the only other thing I'll say is that you'll see a man and a woman. A man opens the film, and then there's a woman, and their voices kind of overlay the science films in the videos. And that man and woman, it's David Black, who was considered like they called him the king of biotechnology. He, I think, had a $500 million fortune, had developed some pharma companies, and a few years ago lost all of that after being convicted of a fraud and kind of Ponzi scheme in the pharma world, and spent 4 years in prison. So the man and the woman that you see, it's David and his wife, and this film has not been released yet to the public, but it's a pretty extraordinary film about documenting his experience through that. Okay.
It's very hard to watch Cialis advertisements on TV knowing that I started the company that developed Cialis, and I don't have even an erection to show for it.
Here I get to live out my childhood dreams of floating among the stars, witnessing the poetry of the universe.
You can always use math to get at all the same facts, but it's a lot faster to just feel it, and then do some math later.
In many ways, mathematics is like craftsmanship. In some ways it's like artistry, in some ways it's like science, but there's a real high craft side to giving a beautiful lecture on the blackboard.
Was one small step for everything to go wrong.
Are we bankrupt? Yes. Our bank account is pretty bipolar too.
I assume the special ingredients, there's angel tears.
It's a cult favorite.
As soon as I used it, I was a convert.
Sure, this guy's got a lot of package.
That's it.
Let's get back to this. So our next speaker is Eli Joteva, who is an alumni of Design Media Arts MFA. I happen to have been on her committee, and she is part of the ArtSci collective too. I'm very excited to have her here after a year of not being around and being 6 months in Moscow for a residency that I'm sure changed her brain a little bit, or at least her perception of what's going on in the art science world. So I'm very excited to get an update. Please welcome Ellie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ellie Jotiva. I'm from Bulgaria. And let's see, my background's in fine arts. I did my undergrad in fine arts and actually applied to come to UCLA DMA because of ArtSci. So it's really nice to be here and to give a laser talk. So I'm going to quickly go through some of my art projects to give you a little bit of background of where I've come from, for those of you who don't know me. And then I'm going to talk about the speculative film proposal design project that I conceived at this postgrad program in Russia. It was not a residency, actually. It was a postgraduate think tank that included a lot of international people from multiple disciplines, and it was very brain rewiring, yes. But to talk about my art practice. So I guess my practice over the last couple of years has been rooted in this fascination with the entropic nature of memory and matter. And I constantly ask myself the question of, how do I embrace the unpredictability of cycles that are larger than the human-centric ones? So this is some documentation from a solo show I had at UCLA, which was what I called an entropic 3-day performance of these ice sculptures that were made from organic materials of different environments. They were kind of like landscape portraits in a sense. I would freeze these materials and then I would 3D scan them, which was incredibly difficult because ice doesn't like to be 3D scanned. And then I would project them in large scale as these sort of rotating planetary spheres. There was also an interactive component where you could enter into one of the models and experience this VR interruption as the sound of the drips would influence basically the experience of the model. The title of the show was Nemoawari, which is the word in between the Japanese mono no aware, which is the beauty found in the sadness of a fleeting moment, in combination with Mnemosyne, which is a fascination with memory, the Greek goddess of memory. So a lot of contemplation between the virtual and the material and how they interact with one another. Something else I got to work with at UCLA was, I was lucky and fortunate to find Mayank Mehta at the neurophysics lab here at UCLA, where they study the neurophysical processes of memory formation. So this performance project was actually inspired by their research on monitoring the coupling of theta and gamma brainwaves in the hippocampus, which is crucial for the formation of memory synapses to form. And so what I built was basically a brainwave headband that would translate my theta or gamma brainwaves based on which one is more prevalent. Because I was kind of thinking a lot about the question, can the body illuminate a landscape based on its own memory of how it remembers it? So here I'm trying to climb a tree with my eyes closed with this brainwave tracking device and essentially go through the challenge of illuminating an image without being able to see it and remembering where the tree is. This project also deals with embodied memory. It was made during a time of mourning. I lost a close friend at the Black Sea, and my work often uses light as a metaphor for awareness. So here I use the recordings of the full moon reflecting into the Black Sea and then projected them back onto my body as a kind of performance meditation on what might exist between the physical and the ethereal plane. And then my thesis project dealt with another layer of the space between the material and the digital, the visible and the invisible, the virtual and the actual. I was really interested in working with imaging sensors that see outside of the visible spectrum. So I used a LiDAR scanner to scan three live plants and produce these cyanotypes. So a LiDAR scanner works with infrared light, and cyanotypes are predate black and white photography, and they use ultraviolet light. So there's some kind of conversation in this historic point of having these two imaging techniques communicate with each other. There's also a point cloud installation in the back, which was an allude to ZPF, or zero point field, which in quantum mechanics refers to the fact that there's subatomic fluctuations in matter even below zero temperatures. It's this idea of we're all in a field of exchange. And the prints are partially developed. So as you can see in the close-up, they're still being exposed to light and changing based on humidity and temperature changes. And that's something that was important to me. The flat images are also composites of multiple points of view of the same 3D scan, which flattens the three-dimensional scans into a dynamic topographic map. And this process was an allusion to Brian Masumi's concept of biograms, which are, he calls them multisensory memory maps that are localized in physical space. So now I'm going to talk about Current, which is a project that happened over the course of 6 months in Moscow at Strelka, the new normal. It was a speculative proposal on the future of broadcasting cinema, and I worked on it with an international team of artists, architects, engineers, and designers, whose names are all there. It kind of started as a visual research project. I can't turn it down, sorry. Oh, maybe I can. Is someone helping me right now? Thank you. So it started, by the way, the sound was made by Michael Villiers, so thank you for the sound interruption. It started as a visual research project on the current trends in image production, some things like volumetric cinema, live stream culture, and personalization of media and optimization, AI optimization of content. And essentially it resulted in this speculative nonlinear film that attempts to propose what the future of broadcasting cinema might look like in a space where live stream is happening three-dimensionally and it's personalized by AI. So because I can't show the whole film, I'm going to talk about some of the key concepts. One of the things we researched really intensely was volumetric cinema. Because currently there's all kinds of new sensing technologies like depth sensors and motion trackers that are used in cinema and virtual reality, that essentially push the image to include 3 dimensions. And in fact, all contemporary images and videos that we even take with our phones are embedded with spatial metadata. So everything from photogrammetry reconstructions to LiDAR scans to your simple video streams can be localized to GPS-specific points. And so we made a point to shoot the film with depth sensor cameras, and the majority of the scenes were reconstructed from either photographs, YouTube, or drone scans of environments. And I guess we did this because we envisioned that the future of three-dimensional live-streamed currents of content that a user can just step into and navigate based on their biometrics. Another thing we looked at was live stream culture, which is a crazy phenomenon. Did you know that there's 13 million people streaming themselves right now? Like, it's crazy. Including us. Yeah, there's millions of streaming cameras live in cities, environments, and on animals. The satellites are constantly streaming the Earth from NASA's satellites. And we're live streaming right now. Hi. So access to these streams has transformed the moving image into this endless current that we can just step into. And in a sense, it presents this kind of live streaming condition that extends the human eye into physically inaccessible environments and non-human perspectives. And it's all happening within the immediacy of now, right? So in the lineage of expanded cinema, Current asks, what may a form of expanded streaming look like? And we imagined that this would happen in 3 dimensions, and that a user would stream their own 3-dimensional environment and mesh it with another user's 3D environment. I really want to show you the whole thing, but there's not enough time. So we considered that the potential of this type of collaborative vision could be blockchain, like blockchain cameras in order to authenticate truth. So thinking about the era of post-truth, our ability to live stream our environments or eras and match them with each other, especially in the lineage of forensic architecture. This informationally rich space can actually provide decentralized perspectives to contested events like protests. And actually, vision mechanisms of self-driving cars already use real-time collaborative vision to check in with each other in terms of what they perceive, so why can't humans do it? And another thing which I was really excited about working on was conceiving this idea of currency. We proposed that that would be a potential currency generated by seeing, that, for example, by watching or tapping into a certain live stream of endangered species or environments, you would be able to generate income for those ecologies. And then we took that one step further and thought about like the online trend of virtue signaling, and imagined that maybe online personas like CG influencers would be able to wear these live streams in order to generate revenue for these endangered ecosystems. I'm going to show you like 3 minutes of it from the middle of it. And just to mention, the system would also be personalized and showing you content that you would want to stream. Like it would infer what you might want to see. And it may also be AI optimized. So it would collapse important moments based on what it knows you might want. It. That's just a small clip of it. But yeah, you can check out more on current.cam. Thanks, guys.
Well, you're making Blade Runner seem like it's from the 1950s. So everybody, go to Moscow for 6 months. No, don't. Last but absolutely not least is Ann Nimitz, who is our featured artist. I have to say, as a teacher and artist, there's nothing more gratifying than when my students become teachers, professors, and peers, as you see right here. So Anne is particularly close to my heart because she was very first generation when I first came to UCLA. She came to us from Karlsruhe and then did the MFA here. and then went to New Zealand for a semester and never came back. So she's a professor at the Wellington Victoria University. We have a joke about that. And was chair there for a while. She learned the tough side of being a kind of a administrator in academia, which I can understand. And now is back. So she already had a show with her drones in 2016, Time Really Flies. And now we have a new version. For those of you who just came in for the laser, we always have our featured artists last so that on your way out you go and check it out. But we want to hear from Anne to tell us a little bit about the process. So please, a warm welcome to Anne Nimitz.
Kia ora, hi. Thank you so much. That almost brings me to tears. Yes, I now am also a teacher and professor and know what it's like. So thanks for being here. I've been having a great time. I'm totally impressed with the 4 talks before me. It's quite hard to follow up. My talk is going to be just a bit about the exhibition that some of you have seen and some of you will see on your way out, called Stealth Drones. So Stealth Drones is the second series is the descendant of this piece called Drone Sweet Drone, which also premiered right here in 2016 and then had a fantastic run with exhibitions in Germany, Austria, and New Zealand. So I'm kind of hoping for something similar to happen again, hopefully. And so the topic is similar in both of these works, but maybe the details are different, the aspects. Overall, this work shows a reawakened interest of mine in kinetic art, which has a lot to do with the David Bermont Foundation. And just to give you a really quick idea of what they looked like. So they had these electronics built in and words printed on them, and the drones were displayed in an organic sort of swarm-like fashion. Right. So these came about, so the initial inspiration was, in fact, the work of a master's student, making me think of, what it's like to become a professor. And so he did this fascinating work. He would build race drones. And I thought the technical drawings themselves were quite fascinating just to begin with. But it also made me think about all the ramifications of drone technology. And so the first version came about. I was looking at kinetic art. I teach a lot of wearable technology and physical computing. So then putting electronics into embroidery hoops and working with textiles was a very logical next step for me. Now, in general, the topic drones, I think, is an incredibly rich topic that could be talking for hours. It's a technology we need to take seriously. There are immense benefits. There are immense threats. There are, I think, a lot of things we don't understand. There's the entertainment industry that really has contributed to the normalization of drones. There are very simple toys that we can buy. So there's this full spectrum from military technology to something cheap and simple that our children play with. And this one, I just added this image I thought was quite interesting. In Chile during the protests, protesters were able to bring down police drones by combining their laser pointers. So of course this technology has vulnerabilities as well. In this new series of drones, I wanted to, whereas the previous one was a lot about the toy and the normalization and the cuteness of drones, here in this new work, I was thinking more about the swarm itself, artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, remote-controlled network of agents, all the meaning of that, the feeling of that, and this is a huge topic in our lives, automation, definitely artificial intelligence, and I think this is just one little aspect of it. So my goal in creating this new work was to focus on the stealthiness, on the sneakiness, on the aspects we may or may not see, depending on our knowledge and awareness. And this project, it took years to develop. Sometimes it just takes a really long time to find the form that makes you happy. And I started with very simple things, just embroidering white on white thread, and it wasn't working for me. And through a long process, I then decided to work with UV thread, which only is visible, which fluoresces under UV light, and to work with an embroidery style that is reminding of lace work. And so I had to look at traditional lace work, display of lace work, which is why also my embroidery hoops of the drones are displayed on black velvet. And the way I came to these, to the camouflage drones, which reveal itself under UV light and then disappear again under regular light, is I used the software by a colleague, two colleagues of mine, that allows you to tessellate. You input an image and then you can choose a part of it and tessellate it, create patterns from it. So what I wanted to do is create these patterns with which the technical drawings of the drones could live and really disappear, be camouflaged. And that just actually meant a lot of manual work of creating many, many patterns, finding one that I think resonated with the shapes, and then embedding the drone, and then doing some post-production of simplifying the patterns, because there's sort of a limit to what the embroidery machine can do and what looks right. And you want all the strengths of the lines to be the same, so it can really disappear, in the hopes that somebody who would not know this work might come in and just see a pattern. And then when the UV lights come on, you actually see the underlying technical drawing of the drone. So stealth drone deals with sort of our limited perception, the fascination, the benefits, the disadvantages of these technologies of artificial intelligence, automation, and so on. And I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
So every time we meet up, I always am amazed at how these weavings happen, and there was a lot of weaving this time. Somebody told me, I think Eric's class last time they were invited, and he mentioned to come to the laser, and they all thought it was going to be a laser show. And this time with stealthy drones, people are also imagining a drone show. So we're not giving you either, a completely different scene. But what I was really struck by tonight especially is that there was this interweaving, with the word used actually very consciously, of hand, human, environmental, animal issues, down-to-earth issues, with a kind of a drone bird's eye view of the larger picture that really is complexity, that we all have to deal with and that we all have to somehow come to terms with, and to base it all on facts. So I really think at this point it is so important for us as artists to work with scientists and facts, and for scientists to work with artists to put those facts out in a way that people will actually appreciate and accept. One of the ways I think about it is just recently there was a letter written by 11,000 plus scientists declaring the emergency for climate issues. And that's it. The letter was signed, everybody read about it, and it's complete abstraction. So I started having this vision of putting 11,000 scientists with 11,000 artists. What would happen it would be absolutely amazing. And we really have to do that, no matter how we manage it, in what ways, in what different forms. So to see this complexity emerging tonight really made me hopeful. Thank you so much.